Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. So we are from group 3 and we will present about theory of meaning. So I'm the first speaker. So in the material, the term of theory of meaning has figured in one way or another in a great number of philosophical disputes over the last century. Unfortunately, this term has also been used to mean a great number of different things in this entry. The focus is on two sorts of theory of meaning. The first sort of theory is a semantic theory. Is a theory which assigns semantic content to expression of a language. The second sort of theory, foundational theory of meaning, is a theory which states the fact in virtue of which expression have to have the semantic content that they have. So in general semantics, David Lewis wrote I district to topic. First, the description of possibly language or grammar as abstract semantic system whereby symbols are associated with aspect of the word. And second, the description of psychological and sociological fact whereby a particular one of this abstract semantic system is the one used by a person or population. Only confuses comes of mixing these two topics. So compressed to these two questions are two different sorts of theory of meaning. One sort of theory of meaning is a semantic theory, is a specific of the meaning of the word and sentence of some symbol system. Semantic theory does answer the question what is the meaning of this or that expression. A distinct sort of theory, foundational theory of meaning, tries to explain what about some person or group give the symbol of their language that means they have. To be sure, the shape of a correct semantic theory places constraint on the correct foundation theory of meaning, and vice versa. But that does not change the fact that semantic theory as and foundation theory are simply different sorts of theory. The term theory of meaning has in the recent history of philosophy been used to standard for both semantic theory and foundational theory of meaning, as the has of some person to mislead. In what follow, we will avoid the term which this material in mean to define the and stick instant to the more specific semantic theory and foundational theory of meaning. So semantic theory. So explaining the main approach to semantic theory is contemporary philosophy of a language might seem to face an in principle stumbling block, given that no two languages have the same semantic. No two languages are comprised of just the same word with just the same meaning. It may seem hard to see how we can say anything about different view about semantic in general, as opposed to view about the semantic of this or that language. This problem has a relatively strong forward solution. While it is of course correct that the semantic for English is one thing and the semantic for French something else, most assumes that various natural language should all have semantic theory of, in a sense, to be explained the same for the aim of what follow will accordingly to be introduce the reader to the main approach to natural language semantics, the main view about the right form for a semantic for a natural language to take rather than to provide a detailed examination of the various views about the semantic of some particular expression.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Anissa Maharani and I'm as the second speaker. Okay, now I will explain about classical semantic theories. The easiest way to understand the various sort of classical semantic theories is by beginning with another sort of theory, a theory of referency. The theory of referency is a theory which pairs expression with the contribution. Thus, expression make to the determination of the truth values of sentences in which they occur. Talk later we will see that this view of the reference of an expression must be restricted in certain ways. And the next is theories of references versus semantic theories. Now, consider the pair of sentence. There's two examples. The first is all chordates are chordates, and the second one is all chordates are renates. Given our assumptions, both sentences are true. Moreover, from the point of view of the theory of reference, the first and the second are just the same. They differ only in the substitutions of renates or for chordates. And these expressions have the same referency because they stand for the same function from objects to the true values. And the next is the relationship between contents and reference. This result that contents determines referency explains one thing we should plausibly want a semantic theory to do. It should assign to each expression some value, a content which determines a referency for that expressions. The next is character and content, context and circumstance. However, there is an obvious problem with the idea that we can assign a content in the sense. To all of the expressions of language like English, many expressions like I or here have a different referency when uttered by different speakers in different situations. So we plainly cannot assign to I a single content which determines a referency for the expressions, since the expression has a different reference in different situations. These situations are typically called contents, context of utterance, or just context. An expression whose reference depends on the context are called indexials, or C entry or context dependent expressions. And the next is possible words semantic. We know that expressions are associated with characters, which are functions from context to contents. And we know that contents are things which, for each circumstance of evaluation, determine a reference. We can now raise a central question of classical semantic theories. What sort of things are contents? The foregoing suggests a basically minimalist answer to this question, perhaps since contents are things which, together with circumstance of evaluation, determine a reference. Contents just are functions from circumstance of evaluation to a reference. And the next is Russellian semantic. Russellian semantic or Russellian proposition is object, properties, relations, and functions. The view is called Russellianism because of its resemble to the view of content defined in the chapter 4 of Russell in 93. So described Russellianism is a general view about what sort of things constituents of propositions are, and doesn't carry a commitment to any expressions. However, most Russellians also endorse a particular view about the contents of proper name, which is known as Millianism. The view that the meaning of a sample proper name in the object, if any, for which it stands. And the last one is Phrygian semantic. Phrygians, like Russellians, think of the proposition expressed by a sentence as a structure entity, with constituents, which are the contents of the expressions making up the sentence. But the Phrygians, unlike Russellians, don't think of these propositionals constituents as the objects, properties, and relation for which these expressions stand. Instead, Phrygians think of the contents as modes of presentations or ways of thinking about object, properties, and relation. I think that's all now. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Sigma Odia and I want to explain material about alternatives to classical semantic theories. This section lists out the basic of 5 alternative semantic theories. The first one is Davidsonian semantics. One kind of challenge to classical semantics attacks the idea that the job of a semantic theory is the systematically pair expression with the entities which are their meanings. Jadi salah satu tantangan untuk semantik klasik adalah menyerang gagasan bahwa tugas teori semantik ini adalah secara sistematis memasangkan ekspresi dengan entitas yang maknanya. Salah satu advantage atau keuntungan dari pendekatan semantik ini adalah parsimony, penghematan. Di sini tidak menggunakan intensi, proposisi Russell atau indera Phrygian yang ditugaskan untuk ekspresi oleh teori semantik propositional yang dibahas di atas. Kemudian yang kedua ada internalist semantic. This view is sometimes called internalist semantic by contrast with views which locate the semantic properties of expressions in their relation to element of the external world. Jadi pandangan ini kadang-kadang disebut dengan semantik internalis yang bertentangan dengan pandangan yang menetapkan sifat semantik ekspresi dalam hubungan dengan elemen-elemen di luar dunia luar. Pendekatan ini dikaitkan dengan karya dari Chomsky. Kemudian kaum internalis menyangkal asumsi umum untuk semua pendekatan yang dibahas sejauh ini, asumsi bahwa dalam memberikan isi ekspresi kami terutama menentukan suatu tentang hubungan ekspresi itu dengan hal-hal dunia yang ekspresi itu dapat digunakan untuk mengatakan sesuatu tentang menurut internalis. Kemudian yang ketiga ada inferentialist semantic. Jadi internal semantics can be understood Assigning the classical semantic assumption that a semantic theory should assign truth condition to sentences. Jadi, semantik internalis ini dapat dipahami sebagai penyangkal asumsi semantik klasik, teori bahwa teori semantik harus menetapkan kondisi kebenaran untuk kalimat. Another alternative classical semantic doesn't deny the assumption, but does deny that truth conditions should play the fundamental role in semantic the classical semantic give to them. Sebaliknya, ahli inferensialis memulai dengan perbedaan antara kesimpulan yang baik dan yang buruk, dan mencoba menjelaskan hubungan antara representational yang oleh ahli semantik klasik dianggap secara kooperatif mendasar inferensialis. Kemudian yang keempat ada dynamic semantics. Dynamic semantics is two of first approximation and approach to semantics which reverses these explanatory priorities, atau the sort of classical theories said above are by contrast called static semantic theories. On a dynamic approach, a semantic theory doesn't aim primarily to deliver a pairing of sentences with preposition with them determine the sentence's truth conditions. Rather, according to this dynamic approach to semantic, the semantic values of sentences are rather context change potentials, Rowley instruction for updating the context or discourse. Jadi semantik dinamis adalah untuk pendekatan pertama, pendekatan semantik yang membalikan prioritas penjelas ini. Jenis teori semantik di atas digambarkan, sebaliknya disebut dengan semantik statis. Pendekatan dinamis, teori semantik tidak bertujuan untuk menyampaikan pasangan kalimat dengan proposisi yang kemudian menentukan kondisi kebenaran kalimat. Sebaliknya, menurut pendekatan dinamis terhadap semantik ini, nilai-nilai semantik kalimat lebih merupakan potensi perubahan konteks, kira-kira instruksi untuk memperbarui konteks atau wawancara. In a dynamic context, many of the questions posed above about how best to understand the nature of semantic contents show up interest as question about how best to understand the nature of context and context change potential. It is controversial not just whether a dynamic or static approach to semantics is likely to be more fruitful, but also what exactly the distinctions between dynamic and static system comes to. Jadi dalam konteks dinamis, banyak pertanyaan yang diajukan di atas tentang cara terbaik untuk memahami sifat isi semantik muncul sebagai pertanyaan tentang cara terbaik untuk memahami sifat konteks dan potensi perubahan konteks. Kemudian yang kelima ada expressive semantic semantic. A final alternative to classical semantic differ from those discussed in the preceding four subsections into relates respective. The first is that unlikely the other sections into relates respective. The first is that unlikely the other non-classical approaches, expressivist semantic was originally not motivated by linguistic considerations, rather it was developed in response to specifically metaethical considerations. A number of philosophers held metaethical views which made it hard for them to see how a classical semantic treatment of sentences above ethic could be correct, and so developed expressivism as an alternative treatment of this part of language. Jadi yang pertama di sini tidak seperti pendekatan non-klasik lainnya, semantik ekspresivis adalah pada awalnya tidak dimotivasi oleh pertimbangan linguistik. Sebaliknya, itu dikembangkan sebagai tanggapan terhadap pertimbangan metaerika khusus. Sejumlah filsuf memegang pandangan metaetika khusus. Sejumlah filsuf memegang pandangan metaetika yang menyulitkan mereka untuk melihat bagaimana perlakuan semantik klasik terhadap kalimat tentang etika bisa benar, dan dengan demikian pengembangan ekspresivisme sebagai pengobatan alternatif menjadi bagian-bagian bahasa ini. I think that's all. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Fitya Aulia Mufaza, and now I will explain the material about general questions facing semantic theories. The first material is how much context sensitivity? A very general question which is both highly important and orthogonal to the above distinctions between types of semantic theories is how much context sensitivity is there in natural languages? Virtually everyone recognizes a sort of core group of indexicals, including I, here, and now. Most also think of demonstrative like or some uses of this and that as indexicals. But whether and how this list should be extended is a matter of controversy. Some popular candidates for inclusion are the first device of quantifications, credible adjectives, athletic models including counterfactual conditionals, nouns and epistemic models, propositional attitude ascriptions, good and other moral terms. Many philosophers and linguists think that one or more of these categories of expression are indexicals. Indeed, something that virtually every natural language expression is context sensitive. Questions about context sensitivity are important not just for semantics but for many areas of philosophy, and that is because some of the terms thought to be context sensitive are terms which play a central role in describing the subject matter of other areas of philosophy. And the last is, what are propositions anyway? There are really two questions here. One is the question, what does it mean to say what X is a constituent of a proposition? The language of constituency suggests parthood, but there's some reason to think that being a constituent of a proposition isn't a matter of. There's some reason to think that it's a matter of X being a part of that proposition. This is perhaps clearest on a Russellian view, according to which ordinary cycle objects can be constituents of propositions. The problem is that a thing can be a constituent of a proposition without every part of that thing being a constituent of that proposition. A proposition with me as a constituent, it seems need not also have every single molecule that now composes me as a constituent. But the fact is inconsistent with the idea that constituency is parthood and the plausible assumption that parthood is transitive. For discussion of this and other problems, see Gilmore, Keller, and Merrick's. I think that's all.
So the number 3 is foundational theories of meaning. So we now turn to our second sort of theory of meaning. foundational theory of meaning, which are attempts to specify the facts in virtue of which expressions of natural languages come to have the semantic properties that they have. The question which foundational theories of meaning try to answer is a common sort of question in philosophy. In the philosophy of action, or CN3, we ask what the facts are in virtue of which a given piece of behavior in a intentional action. In question about personal identify, or CN3, we ask what the facts are in virtue of which X and Y are the same persons. In ethics, we ask what the facts are in virtue of which a given action is morally right or wrong. But even if they are common enough, it is not obvious what the constraints are on answer to this sort of questions, or when we should expect a question of this sort to have interesting answer. Accordingly, one sort of approach to foundational theories of meaning is simply to deny that there is any true foundational theory of meaning. One might be quite willing to endorse one of semantic theories outlined above, while also holding that facts about the meanings of expressions are primitive, in the sense that there is no semantic story to behold about the facts in virtue of which expressions have the meanings that they have. There is another reason why one might be pessimistic about the prospects of foundational theories of meaning. While plainly distinct from semantics, the attempt to provide foundational theories is clearly in one sense answerable to semantic theorizing, since without a clear view of the facts about the semantic contents of expressions, we won't have a clear view of the facts for which we are trying to provide an explanation. One might then be skeptical about the prospects of foundational theories of meaning, not because of a general primitivist view of semantic facts, but just because one holds that natural language semantics is not yet advanced enough for us to have a clear grip on the semantic facts which foundational theories of meaning aim to analyze. Many philosophers have, however, attempted to provide foundational theories of meaning. This section sets aside pessimism about the prospects for such theories and lays out the main attempts to give a semantic account of the facts about language users in virtue of which their words have the semantic properties that they do. It is useful to separate these theories into two camps. According to the first sort of view, linguistic expression inherit their contents from some other sort of bearer of content. So, for example, one might say that linguistic expressions inherit their contents from the contents of certain mental states with which they are associated. I will call few of this type mentalist theories are discussed in 3.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ramadani and I'm going to continue the mastery. 3 foundational theories of meaning. We now turn to our second sort of theory of meaning, foundational theories of meaning, which are attempts to specify in the facts virtue of which expression of natural language come to have the semantic properties that they have. The question which foundational theories of meaning try to answer is a common sort of question in philosophy. In the philosophy of action, or C&3, we ask what the facts are in virtue of which a given piece of behavior in intentional action. And question about personal identity, we same person, we ask what the facts are in virtue of which X and Y are the same person. In ethics, we ask what the facts are in virtue of which a given action is morally right or wrong. But even if they are common enough, it is not obvious what the constraints are our own answer to this sort of question, or when we should expect question of this sort to have interesting answer. Move to 3.1 mental story. All mental story of meaning have in common that they analyze one sort of representation linguistic in terms of analysis of representation of mental representation. For philosophers who are interested in explaining content or representation in non-representation terms, then mentalist theories can only in the first step in the task of giving an ultimate explanation of the foundation of linguistic representation. The second and more fundamental explanation will then come at the level of the theories of linguistic meaning, along with the conviction that content should be explicable in non-representation terms, is an important reason why so much attention has been focused on theories of mental representation over the last few decades. Move the next metric, 3.1.1, the reason programs. Paul Grace developed an analysis of meaning which can be thought of as the conjunction of two claims. First is facts about what expression mean are to explain, or analysis in terms of facts about what speaker mean by utterance of them, and the second is facts about what speaker mean by their utterance can be explained in terms of their intention. This treatise contains the reason programs for reducing meaning to the context of the intention of speaker. In 3.1.2, meaning, belief, and convention. An important alternative to the reason analysis, which shares the reason's commitment to mentalist analysis of meaning in terms of the contents of mental states, is the analysis of meaning in terms of beliefs rather than the intention of speaker. It is infatually possible that such analysis should be possible. After all, there are clear regulations which connect utterance of the belief of speaker. Broadly, it seems that for the most part, speakers seriously utter a sentence which, in the context, there are different ways to make this raw idea precise. There entry convention, according to one important view, a sentence express the proportion P if only and if the following three conditions are satisfied. Move in 3.1.3, mental representation based on theories. The two sorts of mentalist theories sketch about both try to explain meaning in terms of relationship between linguistic expression and proportional attitudes of users of the relevant language, but this is not the only sort of theory available to the theorists who wants to analyze meaning in terms of broadly mental representation. Just a proponents of reasons and convention-based theories typically view their theories as only the first stage is in analysis of meaning, because they analyze meaning in terms of another sort of mental representation. So proponents of mental representation-based theories will typically seek to provide an independent analysis of contents of mental representation. So, I think that's all for me. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Aulia Faradiba. So I want to explain about non-mentalist theories. To give a non-mentalist foundational theory of meaning is to say which aspect of the use of an expression determine meaning and do so without taking that expression to simply inherit its content from some more fundamental bearer of content. In what follows, I'll briefly discuss some of the aspects of the use of expression which proponents of non-mentalist theories have taken to explain their meaning. The first is causal origin. There are two standard problems for causal theories of this sort. The first is the problem of extending the theory from the case of names to other sort of vocabulary for which the theory seems less natural. Example which have seemed too many too problematic are empty names and non-referring theoretical terms, logical vocabulary, and predicates which, because their content doesn't seem closely related to the properties present in perceptual experience, are not intuitively linked to any initial act of baptism. The second problem, which is sometimes called the qua problem, is the problem of explaining which of the many cases of a term's introduction should determine its content. The second is truth maximization and the principle of charity. Causal theories aim to explain meaning in terms of the relation between expression and the object and properties they represent. A very different sort of foundational theory of meaning which maintains this emphasis on the relation between expression and the word give a central role to a principle of charity which holds that the right assignment of meaning to the expression of a subject language is the assignment of meanings which maximize the truth of the subject utterance. The third is reference magnetism. A different sort of theory emerges from a further objection to the sort of theory discussed in previous section. This objection is based on Hilary Putnam model theoretic argument. This argument aimed to show that there are very many different assignments of reference to substantial expression of our language, which make all of our utterance true. The fourth is regularities in use. A different way to develop a non-mentalist foundational theory of meaning focuses less on a relation between substantial expression or sentence and bits of non-linguistic reality and more on the regularities which govern our use of language. Views of this sort have been defended by a number of authors, with section focused on the version of the view developed in Horwich. And the last is social norms. This last concern about Horwich theory stems from the fact that the theory is at its core an individualist theory. It explains the meaning of an expression for an individual in terms of properties of the individual's use of the term. A quite different sort of use theory of meaning turns from the law which explain an individual's use of a word to the norms which in a society govern the use of the relevant terms. Like the otherwise discussed here, the view that meaning is a product of social norms of this sort has a long history. It is particularly associated with the work of later Wittgenstein and his philosophical descendants. I think that's all for my explanation. Thank you very much, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.